He was the king who spent less than 6 months of his 10-year reign in England. A warrior who became a legend in his own time. Today, we're diving into the epic, real-life story of Richard the Lionheart. Richard was born in 1157, the third son of King Henry II of England and the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine. Being the third son meant he wasn't expected to be king. Instead, from a young age, he was groomed to rule his mother's lands in Aquitaine, France. This wasn't some quiet retirement home, it was a rebellious, turbulent region that required a strong hand. It was here, in the fires of constant conflict, that Richard forged his military genius. He wasn't just a prince, he was a hands-on commander, learning the art of siege warfare and battlefield tactics. But the Plantagenet family was anything but peaceful. Richard, along with his brothers, frequently rebelled against their own father, Henry II. It was a messy, drawn-out family drama, often fueled by their mother Eleanor and the King of France. In one famous incident, Richard allied with the French King Philip Augustus against his own dad. This rebellion was ultimately successful. Henry II was defeated, and just 2 days later, he died. On his deathbed, he learned that his favorite son, John, had also joined the rebellion. It was a heartbreaking end for the old king. In 1189, Richard was crowned King of England. But his eyes weren't on London, they were on the Holy Land. Jerusalem had been captured by the legendary Muslim leader, Saladin, and the Christian world was in an uproar. The Third Crusade was called, and Richard, a devout and ambitious warrior, was ready to answer. He saw it as his sacred duty, his chance for eternal glory. To fund this massive undertaking, Richard essentially put England up for sale. He sold titles, offices, lands, anything to raise the cash needed for his army. He famously joked that he would have sold London itself if he could find a buyer. After emptying the royal treasury, he set off, leaving England to be managed by others. His journey to the Holy Land was an adventure in itself. He conquered Sicily, captured Cyprus, and even got married along the way to Berengaria of Navarre. When he finally arrived in the Holy Land in 1191, the Crusader forces were bogged down in a grueling 2-year siege of the city of Acre. Richard's arrival changed everything. His energy, tactical skill, and sheer presence revitalized the Christian army. He brought with him massive siege engines and a determination that was second to none. Soon after his arrival, Acre fell. It was a huge victory, and Richard's reputation soared. But this victory was also stained by a brutal act. Following a dispute over the terms of surrender and prisoner exchange, Richard ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners. It was a shocking display of ruthlessness that cemented his fierce reputation among his enemies. After Acre, the Crusaders marched towards Jerusalem. This is where Richard the Lionheart truly earned his name. He fought a series of brilliant battles against Saladin, the most famous being the Battle of Arsuf. Richard's army was marching down the coast when Saladin's forces relentlessly attacked their rearguard. For hours, Richard held his knights back, enduring a constant barrage of arrows. He waited for the perfect moment. Then, he unleashed a devastating cavalry charge that shattered Saladin's army. It was a tactical masterpiece, proving Richard was one of the greatest commanders of his age. Despite his military successes, Richard never actually laid siege to Jerusalem. He came within sight of the city twice, but both times he turned back. He knew that even if he could capture it, he couldn't hold it once the bulk of the Crusader army returned home. It was a pragmatic, yet heartbreaking decision for him. Instead, he negotiated a truce with Saladin. The treaty allowed Christian pilgrims unarmed access to Jerusalem and maintained Christian control over the coastline they had conquered. It wasn't the total victory he had dreamed of, but it was a significant achievement. With the truce signed, Richard began his long journey back to England. But his troubles were far from over. A storm wrecked his ship in the Adriatic Sea, forcing him to travel overland through the territory of his enemy, Duke Leopold of Austria. Richard had personally offended Leopold back at the siege of Acre, and the Duke hadn't forgotten. Richard tried to travel in disguise, but a king is hard to hide. He was captured near Vienna and handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI, who also had a grudge against him. The King of England was now a prisoner, held for a king's ransom literally. The emperor demanded an astronomical sum, 150,000 marks, which was to 2-3 times the annual income of England. Back home, Richard's brother John was trying to seize the throne, colluding with King Philip of France. But Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, sprang into action. The Queen Dowager worked tirelessly, levying unprecedented taxes on the English people to raise the money. It took over a year, but finally, the ransom was paid, and Richard was freed in 1194. He returned to England for a brief period, just long enough to be crowned a second time to reassert his authority and to deal with his brother John's rebellion. He forgave John, supposedly saying, "He is but a child who has had evil counselors." Then, with England secured, he left again, this time for France, to deal with his old rival, King Philip. Richard would never set foot in England again. The next 5 years were spent in a relentless war against Philip Augustus, fighting to reclaim the lands and castles he had lost while he was imprisoned. During this time, he constructed one of the most advanced and formidable castles of the era, Chateau Gaillard in Normandy. He built it in just 2 years, a marvel of military engineering designed to protect his French territories. It was his pride and joy, a testament to his expertise in warfare. But it was at another, much less significant castle where his story would meet its end. In the spring of 1199, Richard was besieging the small, rebellious castle of Châlus-Chabrol. One evening, as he was inspecting the siege lines without his full armor, he was spotted by a lone defender on the walls. The defender, said to be a young boy using a crossbow and a frying pan for a shield, fired a bolt. It struck Richard in the shoulder. At first, the wound didn't seem life-threatening. But when the surgeon tried to remove the bolt, he mangled the king's arm. The wound quickly became infected with gangrene. Richard knew he was dying. In a final act of chivalry, he summoned the crossbowman who had shot him. The boy, expecting to be executed, was surprised when Richard forgave him, gave him a sum of money, and ordered his release. Richard the Lionheart, the great warrior king, died on April 6, 1199, in the arms of his mother, Eleanor. He had reigned for 10 years but had spent it all fighting against his father, against Saladin, against the King of France, and against rebellious barons. He was a brilliant military strategist and an inspirational leader on the battlefield, but a mostly absent king for England. His legacy is that of the ultimate knight-errant, a figure of romance and legend whose life was more dramatic than any fiction. Thanks for watching our deep dive into the life of Richard I. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more epic stories. See you in the next video.